There haven't been any buildings for quite a while now. The road cut straight down the middle of a dense forest. White dusted evergreens towered over the road. The canopy kept it darker than the sky directly above suggested it was. James wasn't sure what time it was exactly, but it was probably late in the afternoon, guessing by the sun's angle. Its bright golden flashes of light cut through the small cracks and gaps in the trees, illuminating the cab in flickering pulses. He wasn't sure how long since their last break, as Miranda wore their only watch. He wasn't about to wake her, though. She had been asleep for some time now. She moved plenty while she slept, from her forehead against the window to laying curled up on the bench beside James. Her mess of reddish-brown waves obscuring her face would glow vibrantly with the flickering rays of the sun. James hadn't noticed that she had reached up to place her hand on his thigh as she slept. While she slept for many hours now, James kept driving and checking his mirrors, doing what he could to keep himself from thinking about what happened earlier this morning. With so few memories to revisit, it was all too easy to have unpleasant images of blood-soaked snow and dirt flit in and out of his mind. The sounds of screaming men and strange gunfire, the rumblings of a strange beast and his odd connection to it. "Hey, Jimmy." The face of his father greeted him in a chipper tone, though he lay pale-skinned in a pool of his own blood on the cold kitchen floor. "How you holding up?" he asked his son. James stared down at his father's split-open head, sponging up all the gruesome details he didn't want to remember. The dark, congealed blood seeping out from the large gash in his temple, the glimpse of bone beneath the torn flesh, the maroon drippings from the side of his face. His father's unfocused eyes stared up at him unblinkingly. A disturbing smile contrasted with the gore. "Do you think you'll make it?" His father's body continued on without waiting for James to respond. "Not many vials left, Jimmy. They almost got you today. What would happen if they got you?" The more he spoke, the less he sounded like the father he knew and once loved. James had to bend down low to hear the rest of what the ashen body had to say. "I know what would happen. They'd give you to my old friends. I kept secrets, Jimmy. Secrets they think they might find inside you." James' blood ran cold hearing this. His own eyes returned the unblinking gaze his father's dead ones sent. "You think I'm a monster, Jimmy? You don't remember them at all." The wheezy whispers continued. "You'd be in pickle jars if it wasn't for me." A deer leaped across the road not far ahead of James, causing him to brake and swerve to miss it. "God damn it!" James swore as he pulled over and threw the truck in park. He ripped the seatbelt off and got out. Head up, he stared at the trees looming over him against the clear blue sky. He walked without looking for a few paces before stopping to look at the road straight ahead, taking note of the darker tire tracks and the fine white frost on the pavement. A gentle yet frigid breeze blew down the road from behind him as he tried to reorient himself back into the present. "There's solid dirt under my feet," James noted as he looked back down. "Trees are all around me," he added while looking around him. "My cast is irritating," James sighed. At that moment, only the wind made any sound. Taking in the sight of the trees across the road, he saw a small glint of gold from within their shadows. James froze and focused his gaze as best he could into the trees beyond. His heart rate was already picking up at the anticipation of yet another ambush. He could barely make out the silhouette of a person beside a particularly large tree. The stout frame of someone shorter than James appeared to be lightly swaying just beyond the open light. They faced James head on, watching him. James tried not to blink, but instead kept watching and waiting for the stranger to do something. The chill in the wind stung James' eyes to the point he had no choice but to close them. A quick blink wouldn't cost him too much. His eyes popped back open to see, in full view of the daylight, a ghostly pale man standing in the middle of the road. His white button-down shirt was stained with a bloody collar. His hands were purple and swollen in a disfiguring way. Drops of blood still slowly fell onto his black dress shoes. It was his face in particular that kept James' focus. Ashen white, the pale face stared at James with the same haunting, dead gaze his father's body did just moments ago. "James?" the purple lips asked. They didn't acknowledge the blood pouring over them from his head. "Are you okay?" James didn't answer. Not satisfied with no answer, the man took a step forward. James' heart was hammering even faster, seeing the body walk towards him. James still didn't speak, but instead started stepping backwards to keep the gap between himself and the cadaver the same. Not taking his eyes off his slow-moving pursuer cost him his footing, as James sunk his heel into a rut in the dirt behind him. He fell backwards with a sensation not too different from what it felt like to slip into one of his own memories. Unlike his memory trips, James didn't flip through the ground to an upside-down version of reality. He didn't even hit the ground this time. Instead, he was caught by a pair of arms that broke his fall. Staring up into the bright light of the sky above him, he saw the silhouette of who caught him, and her copper curls falling down around James' own upturned face. His warm brown eyes meeting her concerned, cool blue ones. He stared up at her for a moment, before craning his neck to see the body approaching him. Scanning the road left and right, he saw no sign of him. Not even bloodstains in the street. He struggled up and out of her grip to get a better look at the tree line he emerged from, but still he saw nothing. "What is it?" Miranda asked as she stood behind him, ready to catch him should he fall again. James didn't answer her right away. He didn't even look at her. His eyes wide, he kept scanning left and right, searching for any evidence of the disturbing visitor. "Miranda?" James finally turned to look at her again, his eyes meeting hers with visible concern in them. "You shouldn't drive drowsy, you know," informed Miranda, trying to ease his tensions with a bit of humor. Her reassuring smile wasn't returned. His worried look didn't dissipate. "Is it just my memories I'm losing?" His voice carried palpable stress as he questioned her. "You're tired, James," Miranda declared firmly. She grabbed him by the shoulders and turned him to face her directly. "You're not going crazy." "I'm serious." She gave him a little shake as she reinforced her point. "You've been driving all day, constantly looking over your shoulder. I shouldn't have fallen asleep. That's my fault." "You were tired. It's fine," deflected James with a flat tone. "That's no excuse. Clearly you are too," counters Miranda. "Come on. We're still being followed." Her hand slid down from his shoulders to his wrists. "You sit in the cab and I'll top off the tank. We'll get going." She pulled him back over to the truck and opened the passenger door, ushering him inside. "What about you?" James asked as he took a seat. "Shouldn't we stay together?" Miranda's hand was quicker than James and pushed him back into his seat. "We are together. I'm just a few feet away. Besides, I'm the one who's strapped." She shoots him a wink as she puts her hand over her hidden holster. "Now keep it warm in there," she adds as she closes the door on him. Miranda digs under the tarp to find one of the gas cans tied down in the back. Popping open the gas door, she tips the gas can in while frequently shoulder-checking for any visitors coming down the road. Fortune has so far been on their side, as she tucks the now empty can back under the tarp and climbs into the driver's seat. Before she could say anything, she noticed James was barely holding on to consciousness. His head was lolling forward precariously. Miranda sighed and grabbed him over, forcing him to lay down beside her the way she was laying beside him. His eyes closed almost instantly as his head hit the warm coat Miranda was using as a pillow. A golden ray of light cast a deep orange glow through his eyelids. It began to slowly pulse in and out as the rumble of the truck driving away lulled him into a warm and comfortable sleep. You promised these things wouldn't happen, that the kinks were all hammered out. James Sr. sat slumped over in an armchair, staring down into his hands as his wife loomed over him. The kinks are hammered out, Tara. I told you he'd have lapses in memory during the process. He explained in a quieter, more defeated tone. His shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, and his sleeves rolled up, a common style for the doctor after he got off work. This is more than memory lapses, James. This is lapses in being a human. Like you forgot to put his brain back in his head, Tara argued with plenty of energy left. All of this is temporary, James snapped back at her, catching her off guard and snapping her eyes to his. All of this is temporary. Once the transition is complete, he'll be back to his normal self. A thick, uncomfortable pause hung between them for a moment. Only the wall clock made any sound. Jimmy watched with silent unease from just beyond the living room as his parents stared daggers and lasers at each other. He's not your first, is he? Tara finally broke the silence. Your first patient, I mean. She crossed her arms tightly and spoke softer now, though her dark almond eyes were still narrowed sharply at her husband. No, muttered the doctor. And what happened to those other patients? Probed his disillusioned wife. Most are still in treatment, actually, with most showing positive signs. Dr. Merick pointed out rather confidently, regaining some composure. Most? Tara wondered sardonically. What happened to those people, James? Tara? Her husband scoffed at her performative questioning and turned to look out the window near the bookshelf instead. What happened to them, James? Urged Tara, not dropping her feigned surprise. She tilted her head to try and regain her husband's gaze. The earliest patients died. The early patients, Tara. The ones before our son entered the program, reaffirmed James Sr. I would never put our son in during the first round. You put them in the first round? You're okay with that? Tara spat, looking for a new angle of attack. They were all informed and willing adults. James was frustrated by this retreaded argument. Besides, I never knew you to be so concerned about their well-being before. Like you cared for them, James? Tara was winding up again for the fight. Enough to try and cure them, yes. James frowned at the accusation. A cure, huh? Tara scoffed with incredulity. Do your other patients stand frozen like statues too? Do they wander around like zombies and moan oddly, talking nonsense to the walls and ignore your attempts at even basic conversation? Tara stopped speaking as her voice began to break, leaving them back in their shared silence again. I know it's hard to be normal with Jimmy when he's like this. James attempted to ease his wife into a ceasefire. He's our son, James, Tara almost whispered, her dark eyes misting over as she took her turn staring out the window. I haven't forgotten, he reassured her. Sometimes I think you have, Tara added. I've met the people you work with. They've all got their angle. They all want something out of this program, and now our boy's in it. They'll want him too. They don't get him, declared James firmly. I'm making sure of that. Sometimes I wonder if they already have him, and I'm left here with... Tara trailed off as her hand mindlessly reached up to play with her necklace. He's still in there, Tara. James tried yet again to give reassurance. I have no way of knowing, she bluntly stated, turning her inscrutable gaze on her husband, still in his armchair. Happy anniversary, by the way, James said with a weary smile. Tara was caught off guard with this. She furrowed her brows as she quickly thought of the date. It's June, James, she corrected him flatly. Not our anniversary. Jimmy's, James Sr. explained. It's been 4 years since we were told he wouldn't make it to 11. Now he's 14. Tara didn't say anything to this. She just clutched her necklace tight in her palm and took a deep breath. She turned and started walking past the couches and out of the room. She stopped abruptly in front of Jimmy, standing just beyond the entryway. Jimmy froze, seeing his mom. Neither of them moved for a moment before Tara narrowed her gaze at him, suspicious of her son. She stepped toward him cautiously, stooping her head to better look into his eyes in the dimmer light of the hallway. Hi, Mom, greeted Jimmy sheepishly. Tara jumped back as he spoke. Hi, Jimmy. Tara's reply carried no emotion as she greeted her son. Need something? She added after a moment. Oh, Jimmy swallowed before continuing. I was going to talk to Dad about some stuff. Tara stood up straight again and turned her gaze away from him. Your doctor's over there. She jabbed her thumb in his father's direction and resolutely walked out the door. Jimmy's stomach sank even lower as he watched her back leave the room. The sensation of inversion was stronger in this moment than others. The queasiness made it harder than usual for Jimmy not to feel like falling up and away from the ground. Come here, Jimmy, called his dad's weak but friendly tone. You, been listening for a while? He asked, leaning forward in his seat to rest his elbows on his knees. Yeah, Jimmy confessed quietly. I didn't mean to. He quickly added, fearing his father becoming upset with him as well. His dad didn't look at him right away, but stared at the floor and shook his head. It's fine, Jimmy. Don't worry about it. He waved off with a sweep of his hand. You're allowed to walk around your own home, he added with a weary smile. Well, it sounds like you wanted to talk to me about something, James addressed as he sat back in his chair again. Yeah, Jimmy had a hard time forming the words, now that he had his father's attention. He looked over his shoulder at the doorway his mom just disappeared through, before continuing as quietly as he could. I think Mom might be right, Jimmy sheepishly confessed. Oh, don't let that get to you, Jimmy. Your mom's just been... James tried reassuring his son, before being cut off by him. I came home from school 2 days ago, and I woke up today, and Mom keeps looking at me funny. Once Jimmy got started, he didn't stop. I asked her what's wrong, and she said she's fine. But then I asked her when I'm going to go to the appointment with you, and she stared at me all surprised and walked out of the room without talking to me. Jimmy finished and waited for his father to respond. His father, however, gave him a similar silent stare his mother gave him. Well, James started slowly as he thought quickly. She probably looked at you all surprised because, well, we already had your appointment yesterday. She was probably just concerned you didn't remember it, but that's okay. He finished quickly, seeing his son's eyes widen in horror. Lapses in memory are completely expected during this time, and it will all come back once it's complete. Dad, I don't remember any of yesterday, Jimmy reinforced. None of it. A day or two missing isn't that bad, actually, his father declared happily. The gaps can get much bigger for other patients. Why doesn't Mom talk to me after I don't remember things? Jimmy steered the conversation back to his concerns. It's happened before. Not for a whole day, but she doesn't talk to me after I start remembering again. Well, James started again. He was finding it more and more difficult to explain things that won't further upset his son. During, and sometimes for a while after we do those procedures, one of the side effects is usually a severe form of absent-mindedness. This can usually result in blank stares, some moaning, some walking around and staring uncomfortably. Sometimes even nonsensical sentences that some may find unsettling.
Some people, like your mom, really have a hard time with that. Which is why we usually keep our patients in our facilities to monitor. However, your mother-in-law.
Though his father sat right in front of him, his voice began to drown out. Jimmy's hearing entirely began to fade away, leaving his father's voice just a muffled hum in his ears. Jimmy's stomach lurched at the sudden and aggressive sensation of falling into the ceiling above his head. He only fell a few feet before coming to an abrupt stop. James went from hanging by his toes so as not to fall up and away from the ground, to lying on a cold, hard table with the whole room bolted sideways to a wall. He gripped the sides of the table so as not to plummet to his left, into the man approaching him. His vision now matched his hearing, only giving him the vaguest smudges of light and color around him.
He's panicking again,
came a heavily muffled voice.
This is an unpleasant part of the process,
replied another smudge of a person to his right, standing further up the wall.
Quite painful, really.
Jimmy could only make out the golden glint of his glasses on his round face, with the dark pupils within them studying Jimmy on the table.
You said he'd be put deeper under for this part.
The disapproving voice of his father faded in and out from his left.
We can't have him deeper under. I'm doing the length of the brainstem right now.
The fuller-faced man explained placidly.
I would have liked to have been told before starting on his brainstem.
Dr. Merick scolded the other man.
I'm aware he's your son, James, but I didn't want to risk personal interference on his part.
The thicker doctor explained.
You can help now if you like.
Jimmy did his best to look over at his father, but couldn't turn his head more than a few inches in either direction.
Dad, please,
pleaded Jimmy. Hot tears began pouring from his eyes, further obscuring his sight. His dad's face came close to his, suddenly pulling into focus and filling his vision. You're doing fantastic, Jimmy. His dad whispered his praise with a warm smile. Just keep it up. With that, his father's hand came up on either side of Jimmy's head and lifted into place cushioned braces on both of his temples. His head was now locked into place, leaving Jimmy's eyes to do all the looking around.
Dad, no, please, I'm scared.
Jimmy began to cry as his father now added a chin strap to hold his jaw shut. Jimmy sobbed harder as he couldn't move anything anymore. He just watched the blurry shapes move around him before a sharp, hot pain began to drill up and under the base of his skull. The sobbing stopped as soon as the drill passed through his skull, only to be replaced with the soft crackling sensation of a solid object sliding up inside his head. As if the pain couldn't get any worse, his whole body tightened up and his vision blurred even further till he couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. The room spun until he couldn't tell which direction even felt like up. In a snap, James was no longer on the table being bored into. He was standing outside a small cabin at the end of a snow-dusted gravel road that ended in its driveway. Squat, bushy trees lined the property to the right, and a large open field to the left stretched far and away from the small dwelling, with no indication of property lines. Large mountains loomed imposing off in the distance. The image changed again, and James was closer to the house, looking at the garage door. Somehow he just knew that it was unlocked and he could open it with ease. The image changed yet again to show the dented and rusted yellow mailbox at the end of the driveway, its address painted on the side. He only saw it for a moment before it ended. What James saw now was the truck radio bathed in the purple-blue glow of the sunset's light. "I know where to go," James announced. Miranda's leg jerked away from him in surprise. "Hi, good morning," Miranda immediately replied. "Geez, you were out solidly a second ago." 1627 Deer Path Road. James sat up quickly as he began to give her directions. "There's a small road coming up on your right." "Okay, let's do it." Miranda relented and did as he instructed. "Your dad said you'll know when you know, and I Guess you know. James carefully crunched through the snow over to the garage door. He was still sliding his jacket up over his injured arm. Approaching the handle to open the single-car garage, he noticed the bronze chunk of metal sitting in a crater of snow beneath it. Squatting down, James picked up the mangled remains of the padlock that kept the garage secure, sticking his finger partially in the large puncture hole. "That's unsettling," commented Miranda, quietly watching over his shoulder. He handed her the lock and with his good arm lifted the door. The two of them took in the mostly empty garage, now illuminated by the light of the dark purple sky behind them. An aging wooden bookshelf sat against the wall to their left, with some cleaning chemicals, buckets, and a few small boxes sitting on its bowing shelves. A few scattered papers and dried leaves littered the floor as the musty smell of abandonment filled their noses. At the back left corner of the garage was an unlocked door leading into the rest of the house. "It's just for one night," Miranda shrugged. "Let's go get our stuff." "Strap his leg, tight above the tear," Dubois demanded, as he cut away August's jacket and shirt, down to the skin. At least, what's left of his skin. His abdomen was torn open by the drone's claws. A deep, jagged gash that stretched across his stomach, exposing flesh, muscle, and glistening organs. They looked as though they might spill out with each shallow breath he took. Blood, too much blood, stained the ground beneath him, soaking into the snow, turning it a deep, ugly red. Tawil worked silently through his shaking hands to apply the tourniquet as tight as he could to August's upper right thigh. It was difficult to do, as his gloves were now slick with blood. August's thigh now uncomfortably tapered to a near point where it was almost severed clean through. Only a few strips of skin and sinew held his leg to the rest of his body. "Strapped," announced Tawil, as he finally got the tourniquet to cinch tight enough. "Auguste, count to 10 for me, out loud," Dubois ordered, as he was doing his best to pack the deep red trenches in his abdomen.
1, 2.
August struggled to get the numbers out. He stared up at Dubois with wide, horrified eyes. Beads of sweat began to form all across his pale, blood-splattered face. "Tawil, cut his sleeve off," Roland ordered firmly, hiding his own stress from the others. Roland just focused on prepping the IV as Tawil cut away his sleeve. "Cap, inbound aircraft. It's Canard's signatures." Dima ran over from the truck with the news. "Meet him at the clearing," replied the captain, without looking up from his task. "This is the best I can do," Dubois declared, as he inspected his work of plugging and sealing up his injuries as best he could with what they had. The whirring hum of the same heavy aircraft came rumbling from over their heads. It swooped low over to the nearby clearing in the trees. In another moment, 4 gray camo-clad soldiers came running with a stretcher through the trees and leaping over rocks, Dima leading them in. "Get him on the stretcher," ordered one holding a rifle. "His leg's still attached. Move it straight so I can strap it," demanded another. August just stared with absent shock haunting his eyes and shaping his face as he stared up at the people moving around him. On the count of 3, they got him onto the stretcher and pulled a large blue plastic sheet up from his feet all the way to his collarbone. With the tug of a cord, it shrunk-wrapped August and began puffing loose some steam as it began warming up his whole body. "Anyone else, Captain?" asked the man with the rifle, speaking directly to Roland. "Just him," Captain Hubert affirmed. "Come with me. We have something for you," the rifleman ordered before turning to follow the stretcher team back to the waiting aircraft. "Tawil," Roland called out as the airlift roared away. He spotted his youngest team member still kneeling beside the man-shaped pool of blood and matter where his comrade was just laying. For a moment, Roland was reminded of just how young Tawil was. Exceptional skill, but barely out of his teens. Shihab. Tawil turned, hearing his first name being used. Let's get to the truck. The two of them walked over to their truck, still stuck on the embankment from the road, nose down into the thick, packed earth. Dima and Hirsch were stretching winch cables out from the front of the truck and working on securing it to the nearest thick tree trunk. Dubois was washing his hands of the dark blood caked to them. Dooch sat on the trunk of the small tree their truck unearthed as it spun off the road. His back was to the group as he fiddled with his rifle in his lap, lost in thought. The captain's arrival into the group drew everyone's attention. Seeing this, he silently gestured for all them to gather around. All but Dooch came forward. This was supposed to be a simple extraction, started Roland. We've done them before with little problems. In and out. This one has escalated. Despite that, we still need to finish the job, including putting down the rogue Todd. How, Cap? Dima asked, rather defeatedly. He just looked down at the winch cable in his hands. The director has already been working on this for us. She knew we couldn't bring it down without some help. Roland raised his hand and beckoned something forward from behind him. The whole team gasped and stepped back, seeing what emerged from behind the trees. Dooch turned around to see what was causing such a reaction, and even grabbed up his gun at the sight of it. Easy, easy, Roland ordered. This one's ours, he explained as he stepped aside for the large snow-white body of a TOD to approach resolutely. It came to a stop beside Roland, its shoulders coming up to the captain's elbows. They sent that? Hirsch exclaimed, both shock and fear writing his question. Yes, Roland answered. How else do we bring down a Todd? It's smaller than the other one, Dubois noted, his own still wet hand hovering close to his holstered pistol. It's newer than the other one, Dima added, his own hand still filled with the cable, but itching to drop it for his own gun. Correct. Theirs is a 4th gen, this one's a 6th. It's why it has the skin, for better camouflage and silence, Roland explained, going so far as to put his hand on its side to bolster confidence in his team. He didn't let on to his own fear of the murder machine standing right beside him. The drone didn't react. It stood rock solid at attention, ignoring the captain touching its cold, smooth surface. Roland looked around at each of the faces of those he's still responsible for, his mind dwelling on the one he felt he failed. Let's take out Merick's protector and bring this to a close.